The dawn rises cold and gray over Richmond, California. The smell of salt and oil drifts through the air. It is the year 1942, and America is losing the race against time. Across the Atlantic, German U-boats are slicing through convoys like silent predators. The sea, once a lifeline, has become a graveyard. In the first 6 months of the year alone, 3 million tons of Allied shipping have been sunk beneath the waves. Tankers burn on the horizon. Liberty itself, it seems, is sinking faster than it can be built. In Washington, military planners study grim charts. Each red line represents another ship gone, another cargo lost, another crew swallowed by the Atlantic. They calculate the numbers and reach the same horrifying truth. At this pace, the Allies will run out of ships before they can win the war. The United States, vast, industrial, confident, suddenly faces a challenge it cannot solve with soldiers or generals. It needs ships faster than any nation has ever built them. And yet, the conventional shipyards of America, with their proud traditions and skilled craftsmen, say it can't be done. To build one cargo ship, a Liberty ship, takes 230 days, maybe more. Steel must be riveted, plates must be welded by hand, and the sea is unforgiving to haste. The process is sacred, almost ritual. It cannot be rushed. That's what the experts said. But somewhere far from Washington, far from the Navy's blueprints and bureaucrats, a man who had never built a ship in his life was about to prove them all wrong. His name was Henry J. Kaiser, and to the old shipbuilders he was a joke. A civilian. A dreamer. A man who built roads, not fleets. Yet in that contradiction, the road builder who would become the ship's savior, lies the heart of this story. Because Kaiser didn't see shipbuilding as an art to be preserved. He saw it as a problem to be solved. And when the problem was survival itself, he believed the answer had to be impossible. The war at sea was not just a battle of guns, it was a battle of production. Hitler's navy wagered that America could not build faster than Germany could destroy. Each ship sunk was a victory for the Axis, each cargo lost a blow to Britain's survival. In 1941, when President Roosevelt called for the arsenal of democracy, he wasn't speaking poetically. He was announcing a race, one fought not on battlefields but in factories and shipyards. But the shipyards of that era were worlds of slow precision. They relied on craftsmen, men who measured by instinct, who cut steel by feel. Every hull was a handmade creation, as much sculpture as engineering. The result was beauty. But beauty takes time. And time was the one thing the Allies didn't have. Archival audio, Roosevelt speaking, static-laced. We must outbuild, outproduce, and outsupply the enemy. Those words echoed across the nation, into the steel mills of Pittsburgh, the foundries of Detroit, the dry docks of Portland and Richmond. But even the most loyal industrialists knew it was madness. How do you build a 10,000-ton ship every few days when it takes 8 months to build just one? How do you fight a war with math that doesn't add up? Cut to scene, Richmond Shipyard, 1942. Torches sparking. Women in overalls. African-American workers arriving by train. Kaiser arrived with no credentials, no naval experience, and no patience for the way things are done. What he had was a construction man's genius. The belief that process can be redesigned. Before the war, he had built dams and highways across the West. The Hoover Dam, the Grand Coulee, projects dismissed as impossible until he made them reality. He brought with him the mindset of assembly line efficiency, the logic of prefabrication, and the audacity of a man who didn't know what couldn't be done. He looked at the massive hand-built ships of the traditional yards and said, "Why not build them like cars?" The shipbuilders laughed. But Kaiser didn't. Sparks raining from a welder's torch, then fade into blueprints. He divided the ship into prefabricated sections. Bow, stern, deck, bulkheads, each built separately, simultaneously, and then joined like pieces of an enormous puzzle. Instead of rivets, he used welding, a technique once dismissed as too weak for ocean service. Instead of skilled craftsmen alone, he recruited men and women from every background, farmers, mechanics, housewives, clerks, and trained them on the job. What emerged in Richmond, in Portland, in the yards of the West Coast, was something the world had never seen before. Mass production applied to shipbuilding. It was messy. It was chaotic. It was revolutionary. And within months it began to work. Scene, March 1943, Richmond Shipyard. The first ships rolled off the line not in months but in weeks. The skeptics watched in disbelief. Ship after ship slid into the Pacific, their gray hulls gleaming, their flags unfurling. By 1943, the miracle had become a rhythm, a Liberty ship every few days. And then the impossible, one every 4 days. 230 days reduced to 4. What had once been the work of nearly a year became the heartbeat of an industrial symphony. Workers pouring out of trains, welders in masks, American flags waving above steel hulls. The story of Henry Kaiser was not just about ships. It was about faith, the faith that ordinary people could perform extraordinary acts if given a chance. Under his direction, 90,000 men and women worked around the clock, in 3 shifts, under floodlights that turned night into day. They built not only ships but an idea, that democracy itself could outproduce tyranny. The Liberty ship was no masterpiece of naval design. It was slow, ugly, utilitarian. Sailors called it the ugly duckling. But it was reliable. It carried tanks, guns, grain, and hope. And it was made possible because one man refused to accept the limits of tradition. When asked how he accomplished the impossible, Kaiser replied simply, "You can't sit on your imagination. You've got to get up and build it." The contradiction at the heart of this story, the dreamer who defied the experts, the civilian who armed an empire, captures the essence of America's industrial transformation during World War II. The old world built ships by craftsmanship. The new world built them by faith and innovation. The battle of steel and fire was not just won at sea, but in the factories, in the sparks of welding torches, and in the restless imagination of those who believed that speed itself could be a weapon. Sound of waves, then a ship's whistle. Voiceover, final lines of intro. In a war measured by tonnage, miles, and time, Henry Kaiser proved that victory could be manufactured. His idea, once ridiculed, turned the tide of the Atlantic, supplied armies across the world, and reshaped the future of industrial America. This is the story of how one civilian's impossible idea made Liberty ships appear every 4 days instead of 230, and in doing so revealed a deeper truth. That the real engine of victory is not steel or steam, it is imagination. Night, the Atlantic Ocean. Black waves crash under faint moonlight. A distant explosion illuminates the horizon. In 1941, the Atlantic Ocean had become the most dangerous place on Earth. German U-boats prowled the deep like steel wolves. In the first 6 months of 1942 alone, they sank more Allied ships than Britain could replace. For every cargo vessel launched, 5 were lost. Convoys burned in the darkness. Oil slicks shimmered over floating wreckage. And across the United States, shipyards labored in vain, their proud production methods too slow to keep pace with destruction. The math was merciless. A single Liberty ship took 230 days to complete. The war was devouring them faster than America could build them. Inside the War Production Board, planners drew grim conclusions. "We're building our ships for the bottom of the sea," one officer muttered. And yet, across the nation, a new figure entered the conversation, a man no one in naval circles took seriously. He had never built a ship, never commanded a yard. But he spoke with the conviction of an engineer who believed time itself could be redesigned. Henry J. Kaiser. A man of the West, builder of highways, dams, and dreams. To him, impossibility was a challenge, not a verdict. Before the war, Kaiser had overseen the construction of the Hoover Dam, Grand Coulee, and Bonneville, projects so vast that engineers called them pyramids of the modern age. He was not a shipbuilder, but he understood one essential truth. When a nation must move mountains, it cannot rely on tradition. He looked at shipbuilding the way he once looked at pouring concrete, as a system, not a ritual. And when Roosevelt called for the arsenal of democracy, Kaiser saw his moment. 2. Turning point, the impossible idea. Fade in, December 1941, Richmond, California. Empty shoreline. Fog over the bay. Kaiser stood before an empty stretch of mud and salt water and imagined the impossible. A shipyard that could outproduce every yard on Earth, by rethinking how ships were made. Traditional yards built hulls from the ground up, one piece at a time, each weld dependent on the one before it. Skilled craftsmen, proud but slow, shaped every plate by hand. Kaiser rejected all of it. Instead, he divided the ship into modular sections, bow, stern, decks, bulkheads, and assigned each to a different team. Every section could be built simultaneously in separate shops, and then welded together like pieces of an enormous puzzle. He borrowed the concept of prefabrication from automobile manufacturing, scaled it up, and fused it with round-the-clock shifts. To welders he said, "We will build ships the way Henry Ford built cars." They laughed. But in Kaiser's world, laughter was the first step toward progress. He assembled teams of engineers, logisticians, and laborers from across the nation. He hired women, immigrants, and African Americans, groups long excluded from heavy industry. He opened training schools on site, teaching thousands to weld, rivet, and assemble steel in days. He didn't wait for experience. He built it. Kaiser broke the traditional rhythm of the shipyard. The day no longer ended with sunset. Under floodlights, sparks rained through the night like fireflies over the bay. Every man and woman who entered his yards became part of a new kind of army, an industrial army where speed was the weapon. 3. Confrontation, industry versus tradition. 1942, Navy Boardroom, Washington, D.C. Dialogue reconstruction. Admiral Land, you can't build ships like toys, Kaiser. These are war vessels, not Model Ts. Kaiser, Admiral, I'm not building toys. I'm building survival. The clash between innovation and tradition was brutal. The Navy distrusted him. Veteran shipwrights mocked his methods. Labor unions feared chaos. Even Roosevelt, who admired his confidence, worried he had promised the impossible. Yet Kaiser refused to bend. He poured concrete foundations before his designs were even approved. He hired workers before payroll systems were ready. He demanded steel shipments before contracts were signed. He didn't build shipyards to build ships, he built a system to build shipyards. Within months, the Richmond yards emerged from the mud, vast, roaring factories of steel and light. Wide shot, 4 shipways alight under the night sky. The first Liberty ship built under Kaiser's system took 244 days, slower than average. The skeptics smiled. The second took 153. The third 90. Then 43. Then 17. And by the time the nation realized what was happening, Henry Kaiser's impossible system was delivering a new ship every few days. In November 1942, one of his crews launched the Robert E. Peary, completed in just 4 days, 15 hours and 30 minutes. The world gasped. The record was ceremonial. No ship could be built that fast consistently, but it proved the point. Industrial warfare had entered a new dimension. For the human element, the people who built miracles. Every morning the whistle blew across the bay and thousands answered. Men in helmets. Women in bandanas. Farmers, waitresses and carpenters turned welders overnight. They came from 40 states, drawn by rumors of jobs that paid and a cause that mattered. The average worker was 26 years old. Many had never seen the ocean. Yet they were about to change naval history. Kaiser understood morale as much as mechanics. He built daycares beside the yards so mothers could work. He opened health clinics and cafeterias. He gave every worker a sense of belonging to something monumental. A young welder named Helen Beebe wrote in her diary, "We work all night under the arc light. Sparks fall on our shoes but we don't mind. Every plate we weld feels like a bullet for the boys overseas." For many women, it was their first taste of industrial labor, their first paycheck, their first independence. They became the face of Rosie the Riveter. Though here in Kaiser's empire they were Rosie the shipbuilder. Kaiser's yards became melting pots of democracy, black and white, male and female, immigrant and native-born, bound together by purpose. In a nation still segregated by law, his shipyards quietly practiced a new kind of equality born from necessity. Letters from soldiers began to arrive at the yards. "We saw one of your ships off Algiers," wrote a Marine sergeant in 1943. "It felt like home was following us across the sea." In return, welders scribbled messages inside hulls before sealing them. Prayers, names, jokes, knowing the ships would carry pieces of their hearts to faraway fronts. They didn't see themselves as builders of steel but of lifelines. V. Consequences, the miracle of mass production. 1943, archival montage. Dozens of ships sliding into water. Drums and orchestral music swell. By mid-1943, Kaiser's revolution had transformed the war. His yards produced over 1,490 ships, more than all Axis powers combined in merchant tonnage. Each ship carried 10,000 tons of supplies, tanks, rations, trucks, weapons. They formed the arteries of Allied logistics, feeding the Red Ball Express in Europe and the island campaigns of the Pacific. Where once convoys limped across the Atlantic, now they surged in strength. German U-boat captains began reporting a new despair. "For every ship we sink," one wrote, 2 more appear. Kaiser had reversed the logic of warfare. The ocean of loss became an ocean of renewal. The Liberty ship, once derided as clumsy and crude, became the most produced vessel in human history, 2,710 built by war's end. They were ugly ducklings, yes, but they carried victory in their hulls. When reporters asked him how he managed such miracles, he smiled. "I gave the people a goal and the tools. They did the rest." He believed that if ordinary citizens were trusted with extraordinary tasks, they would rise higher than any expert predicted. His methods became the model for future industries, aerospace, automotive, even healthcare. And yet, behind the numbers there was exhaustion, burnout, injuries, the toll of 24-hour labor. The same speed that won the war also tested human limits. But for the workers of Richmond and Portland, fatigue was a badge of honor. They had proved something greater than patriotism, they had proved possibility itself. 6. Reflection, the new warfare of ideas. When the guns finally fell silent in 1945, the Liberty ships lay scattered across every ocean from the beaches of Normandy to the harbors of Manila. Many would rust, sink, or be scrapped within a decade. But their legacy endured, not in steel but in the method that forged them. Kaiser had changed the meaning of industrial warfare. He had shown that victory could be assembled, piece by piece, shift by shift, by ordinary citizens. Historians would later call it the democratization of production. His shipyards had not only defeated Hitler's blockade, they had built the foundation for America's post-war boom. After the war, Kaiser turned his attention to healthcare, founding the Kaiser Permanente system, another impossible idea that became an American institution. He believed that the same principles that built ships, efficiency, organization, care for workers, could build a healthier nation. Black and white footage of workers leaving the yard, holding children. But perhaps the most profound legacy was psychological. The Liberty ships reminded the world that industrial power was not just a measure of machines, it was a measure of imagination. Each welded seam was a statement. The old ways could change and the untrained could achieve mastery. Kaiser's triumph was not merely mechanical, it was moral. He shattered the arrogance of expertise. He showed that when the stakes are survival, innovation is no longer optional, it is destiny. Music swells, strings and brass. In the years that followed, his shipyards fell silent. The torches dimmed. The workers returned to civilian life. But across the world, engineers and leaders carried forward the lesson of Henry J. Kaiser. That the heart of progress beats faster when imagination outruns fear. The Liberty ship was not beautiful but it was free. It was born from desperation and delivered by belief. From 230 days to 4, not just a feat of engineering but a revolution in human thinking. And though time has forgotten many of their names, the workers who built them changed the course of the 20th century. Because when one civilian dared to imagine the impossible, an entire nation discovered that impossible was only another word for unfinished. The war ended but the ships remained, ghostly silhouettes anchored in memory. Some were sold, some scrapped, some left to rust where the tide could reach them. Their steel had done its duty, carrying hope across oceans of peril. The Liberty ship, once the miracle of wartime production, quietly slipped into history. Yet what it represented never disappeared. For in its steel bones lived a story larger than war. The story of how imagination became a weapon, and how one civilian's defiance rewrote the limits of human industry. Archival footage. Workers clocking out, families waving flags, children playing in the yard. When the Richmond shipyards closed, 90,000 workers went home to lives that would never be the same. They had spent years turning raw steel into lifelines. Many would never forget the rhythm of the yard, the hiss of welding torches, the clang of girders, the whistle that marked the end of a shift. They had entered the war as ordinary citizens. They left it as veterans of production, soldiers of industry. And though their hands bore no rifles, their work had conquered an empire built on fear. In the decades that followed, America changed. Factories that once forged victory began producing cars, homes, and highways. Suburbs spread across the land like peacetime convoys. And behind it all lay the legacy of the Liberty ship, the idea that anything, if organized with courage and purpose, could be made faster, cheaper, better. But progress carries its own irony. The same industrial power that won the war would later reshape the planet, fueling consumer empires, global logistics, and the age of automation. What had begun as a desperate race to survive became the foundation of a civilization addicted to speed. In this sense, Henry Kaiser's victory was both a triumph and a warning. He had shown humanity what it could achieve when united by necessity. But he also revealed the cost of perpetual acceleration, the exhaustion, the dehumanization, the loss of craftsmanship in the face of mass production. It was the paradox of modernity. Efficiency saves lives but it can also erase the human touch. Kaiser himself never stopped building. In the post-war years he turned his attention to something even more radical, healthcare. If the shipyard had proven that efficiency could save a nation, he reasoned, why not apply it to saving lives? He founded Kaiser Permanente, a medical system designed on the same principles that built the Liberty ships. teamwork, organization, accessibility. It was healthcare as an assembly line for wellness, born not from profit but from wartime necessity. To him, human well-being was simply the next frontier of mass production. By the 1950s, America had entered the atomic age. The Liberty shipyards were silent, the sparks long gone, but the spirit that built them had migrated into every corner of the modern world, into aerospace, infrastructure, medicine, and computing. The assembly line had become civilization's bloodstream. And yet, beneath the progress, the same question lingered, the same contradiction that had defined the war. When imagination conquers the impossible, what remains impossible next? Kaiser didn't just build ships. He built belief. The belief that people, ordinary people, could rise to meet impossible challenges if they were given trust, tools, and purpose. Voiceover continues. That belief was contagious. It spread through a generation that rebuilt the world after devastation. It gave rise to the moon landing, to the interstate highways, to Silicon Valley. Every innovation of the 20th century in some way echoed the rhythm of those shipyards, where a million small hands turned chaos into order and doubt into design. At the time, few realized the deeper meaning of that achievement. Yes, it won a war. But it also revealed a truth about the human condition, that the line between possible and impossible is drawn not by skill, but by faith, the willingness to imagine a world that doesn't yet exist. The workers of Richmond, the welders of Portland, the engineers of the Kaiser Empire, they didn't just change industry. They changed the psychology of effort. They proved that courage is not limited to the battlefield, and that victory can be forged as surely from steel as from sacrifice. SFX, ocean wind, distant ship's horn. By the end of the war, more than 2,700 Liberty ships had been launched. They were not graceful, and few survived long after 1945. But they carried something indestructible, the proof that collective imagination could overcome fear, distance, and time itself. In their wake came a new philosophy of power, that production was no longer just a means of survival, it was the language of freedom. Factories became cathedrals. Steel became scripture. And every torch that once lit the night in Richmond was a candle of defiance against tyranny. Today, massive cargo vessels cross oceans with the same quiet rhythm the Liberty ships once did. Their hulls are larger, their engines stronger, their voyages safer. Yet their DNA traces back to that brief, furious moment in history when one man refused to accept the limits of his time. Every container lifted by a modern crane, every ship that sails from Shanghai to Los Angeles, carries a whisper of Kaiser's question. What if we could do it faster? But there is another question equally vital, the one he left unanswered. How fast can we go before we forget why we started? The story of the Liberty ships is not just about production, it's about purpose. During the war, speed was survival. After the war, it became ambition. And now, in the 21st century, as we race toward automation, artificial intelligence, and limitless production, Kaiser's legacy still stands before us, part triumph, part mirror. He proved that progress is possible. But he also reminds us that progress without humanity is just machinery. When historians look back, they will see that Henry J. Kaiser changed the definition of builder. He did not swing a hammer or weld a beam. He built systems, and, more profoundly, he built belief. He took the quiet faith of millions and turned it into motion, into ships, into victory. His genius was not invention but imagination, the courage to see what others could not. In his world, the phrase, "it can't be done," was not a wall, but an invitation. A Liberty ship at sea, sunset behind it. In the end, the Liberty ship was not merely a vessel of war. It was a vessel of faith. Faith in the ordinary, faith in the collective, faith in the power of imagination to outpace destruction. 230 days became 4. An idea became an armada. And one civilian proved that victory, like invention, belongs not to those who follow the rules, but to those who dare to rewrite them. The waves have long since washed away the sounds of the shipyards. But if you listen closely, in the hum of a modern port or the rhythm of a factory floor, you can still hear the echo of that impossible idea. Hammer against steel, heart against doubt. Because in the final reckoning of history, Henry Kaiser's lesson endures. The real weapon of the modern world is not steel nor speed, it is belief.